Hey there. Thank you for joining me, Stanley, on this Saturday. Um, I'm going to be bringing up a series that I've done before. A lot of the things I'm going to say aren't new, but I think they're very timely. And so I'm going to look at how postmodernism critiques our ways of thinking. I've done this before. It's not going to be anything crazy. And before I go too far, I want to explain what I'm not going to be saying and what I am going to say. Because when we hear postmodernism, a lot of times we begin to think about the people who say that everything's relative, there is no absolute truth, there is no objectivity. Everyone's truth is their own truth, and it's all relative. That's not what I'm saying at all. But from my interactions with postmodernism, that's not even what postmodernism says. That is like some crazy twisting of what postmodernism might say in some situations. But no, postmodernism, I think at its best, gives us a very helpful critique of the ways that we try to think about situations. And that's what I'm going to be doing, is I'm going to be bringing up ways that some of us think about things that I think all of us are tempted toward, but that are not helpful, and try to use this postmodernist critique as a way to say, hey, why don't we wait to think about it quite that way, and let's look at these things that I'm going to bring up and see if they are influencing our thinking. And if they are, what do we need to address to make sure that we're thinking about this right? So we're going to get into a lot of things. We're getting into language. We will get into all sorts of issues with how we think. But I'm going to start us off with just us wishing that we were objective. We think we understand the world as it is. And it's really hard to convince ourselves and to convince others that we don't. And so when we begin interacting with, it could be politics, it could be stories that we're hearing, we think that we're interacting with those stories the way that they actually are. And there are a couple problems with that. One of them, which we're not really going to deal with, but I do want to give a passing mention to, is we assume the story we're hearing is actually the story that's there. There are a lot of ways to manipulate words so that you're not actually saying something wrong, but you're not really presenting the story that is actually there. Details you leave out or include. There's all sorts of ways to manipulate a story. That's not what I want to address. Let's say we know the facts. We know roughly what's happened. There are so many ways that we aren't interacting with the actual truth of the story. And one of the biggest ones comes down to experience. Our experiences so deeply shape us that they change the way that we think, and they change the way that we view the world. And most of us think, in a way that's true. Like, of course, if I have certain experiences, I'm not going to see things the same as someone else. But it's really easy for us to miss how pervasive that actually is. It's so easy for us to miss when we talk about groups of people. It's so easy for us to not realize that if we don't know people who are a part of that group, we don't really know what we're talking about when we talk about them. Maybe you have a passing experience connected to them, but you don't actually know them. You're not friends with anyone like that. You just see them as some random abstract thing out there, instead of as the specific people who you know and you love and you care about, it is very easy to just talk about and put things onto them that may or may not be true. There was actually a somewhat famous example of this recently. There were governors when the quarantine was kind of being talked about. How are we going to bring an end to this? How are we going to begin reopening the country? There were politicians who began to say, hey, you know what? Some people are going to have to die, and some people are just going to have to make that sacrifice. And most of the time, it wasn't the people who were saying that. It was just random other people. And there were videos that were then done of people who were closer in age to me. If they weren't my age, they were probably in their 30s or early 40s, who were like, yeah, well, we have to reopen, and yeah, the death rate could go up because of that, but it's something that has to happen. We're gonna destroy our economy. We're gonna destroy our country if we don't start reopening soon. And then they would say, okay, so you would be willing to have 50 more people die if that meant that your city could reopen. And people are like, oh yeah, if that's what it's going to take, it's really a shame, but yes, I'll do that. And then the people who were doing the interview were like, okay, well, hey, here are 50 people who you know. So are you really willing to let these 50 people die? And all of a sudden they're like, oh, wait, no, no, I'm not willing to let them die. Because when you're talking about an abstract out there who you're not connecting with, it's really easy to say what you want about them. But when it isn't abstract and it's people who you are in direct contact with, it changes. It's really easy to make up stories until you meet the people you're talking about. And the United States has done this for a while, and not just the United States. I mean, it's happened all around the world. We have done this for a while, but it has become prevalent in the United States that we make up stories about groups of people all the time, all different types of people. And a lot of us don't know if it's true because we don't interact with the people we're talking about. It could be people of a different race. It could be people of a different socioeconomic background. There are stories that I used to believe, I heard talked about, and I didn't know any better. And I probably continued about why some people are poor, or how some people act, or the threat that certain people cause. And the problem is, when I don't know them, I think I'm being objective. I think I'm being fair. I didn't say any of this stuff because I just really hated those people. I thought I was talking about the truth. And I think most of us think that we're talking about the truth. We don't realize how our experience, or lack thereof, has so colored our way of thinking that we can't understand the truth behind what we have to say. We don't realize that when we are kept in our communities of people who think like us and act like us and talk like us and look like us, what we are doing isn't helping ourselves figure out what's right and wrong, what's true and false, but we are taking away our access to being able to figure out what is objectively true, what is absolutely true, and what is just our experience. I think the Christian church has done this for a long time, and it has really hurt us. I think that those of us in the United States have done this for a long time, and it has really hurt us. I think all sorts of groups of people within the United States have done this, and it has really hurt us. And the only way to get away from it is to start listening to and hearing other stories. There's an amazing TED Talk by the African author, I think her name is Chimamanda Adichie. I will make sure to put a link to her and her TED Talk in the description. But she gave this TED Talk, and the title is "The Danger of a Single Story." And she grew up in Africa, and the only stories she knew how to tell were stories about what happens in Europe and the United States. To kind of put a much more lighthearted twist on this, right? We tell ourselves the story about how there are 4 distinct seasons, and in winter it gets very cold and it snows, and then in the spring it's kind of rainy, but it's also sunny, and there are flowers that come up. And then the summer is when it gets hot and there are thunderstorms. And then in the fall, it starts to cool off and the leaves change and there's this breeze. And that there are these very clear 4 distinct seasons. That is the story we tell ourselves. I have yet to live in a place that actually does that. Living in Indiana, you never know. You never know what the weather is going to be like. Today, it's in the 80s. Tomorrow, the high is in the 60s. The next day, it's supposed to get back to the 80s. We just recently had a thunderstorm. It's nice and sunny out. We can get snow into April or May. We can get 90-degree weather in April or May. But then I moved to North Carolina for a few years, and it was the same thing there. The only difference in the weather that I can tell you about is that there weren't as many thunderstorms, and it was 10 degrees warmer. That was it. The seasons thing is a story that we tell ourselves based on certain parts of the world that in a lot of other parts of the world, if not in most of the world, it's not true. There are so many other stories that we tell ourselves that aren't true. And to learn what the truth actually is, we need to allow ourselves to experience that truth, to get out and build relationships with people who have different experiences. The more experiences that we have, whether because of ourselves or because of people who we know and friends who we make, the more of these experiences we have, the better we will be able to discern truth when it's there. And postmodernism tells us this. It tells us the ways that experience so fully shapes our ways of thinking. And we're going to look at a whole bunch more. We're going to look at some that are much more concrete, much smaller. But as we just get kicked off, find all the ways that your experience could be shaping your view of truth. And find groups of people who you don't know and aren't connected with, and try to make those connections so that your blind spots can be revealed to you. Because the only way for us to access any form of absolute truth, a truth that is beyond us, is to connect with people who aren't like us. And then we can share in the truth that is beyond either one of us. Thank you for joining me. I'm looking forward to this postmodern series. I'll see you guys later. God bless you. Bye.